Alrighty, pushers. Welcome back to another episode of Mr. BAP US History, your source for knowledge and notes over all things advanced placement US history. Let's get right into it. On today's episode, Reconstruction of the South, the undoing of Reconstruction 1865 to 1877. Our quote comes from Rutherford B. Hayes, inaugural address, March 5th, 1877. The evils which afflict the southern states can only be removed or remedied by the united and harmonious efforts of both races, actuated by motives of mutual sympathy and regard, and while in duty bound and fully determined to protect the rights of all by every constitutional means at the disposal of my administration, I am sincerely anxious to use every legitimate influence in favor of honest and efficient local self-government as the true resource of those states for the promotion of the contentment and prosperity of their citizens. In the important work of restoring the South, it is not the political situation alone that merits attention. The material development of that section of the country has been arrested by the social and political revolution through which it has passed, and now needs and deserves the considerate care of the national government within the just limits prescribed by the Constitution and wise public economy. On to the notes. The Republicans unraveled. The end of Reconstruction was caused by a wide variety of things, including, but not limited to, but mostly, the leading radical Republican, Charles Sumner, died in 1874, leaving the radical Republicans without a highly motivated and capable leader. Conflicting goals. The freedmen wanted autonomy or self-rule, and policymakers just wanted to end Reconstruction as quickly as possible and focus on recovering the national economy after the Depression of 1873. Southern anti-black propaganda. This also helped contribute to the end of Reconstruction, as the Southern racists filled the Northern media with anti-black propaganda. Republican scandals, such as the Credit Mobilier scandal, which was a railroad scam, and the Whiskey Ring, which was tax fraud, discredited the Republican administration that was running Reconstruction. Economic depression. As previously mentioned, the Depression of 1873 is going to put a damper on the Reconstruction efforts, as energy is going to be turned towards what to do about the economy instead of what to do about rebuilding the South. And finally, last but by no means least, the ex-Confederate resistance and violence. Those Southerners may have been lost the Civil War, but they did not want to give up their racism and their determination to continue at all cost their way of life as close to as previous the Civil War as possible. The Depression of 1873. The North that had focused heavily on railroad construction created a boom in the economy, which collapsed in 1873, which led to bankruptcy and unemployment. Tramps or homeless people wandered around looking for jobs. Should I make money? This took funding away from Reconstruction programs like the Freedmen's Bureau. Also, widespread corruption, bribery, and theft in both political parties also took funding. To make matters worse, the Freedmen Saving and Trust Co., a bank, failed in 1874 and wiped out people's savings. Classical liberalism or laissez-faire government. Free trade, small government, low taxes, limits on voting rights, let alone government philosophy, contributed to the end of Reconstruction as well. Liberal Republicans broke from the Republicans and formed a third party called the Liberal Republican Party in the election of 1872. They lost the election to Ulysses S. Grant, but their message resonated with Democrats who joined them later to revive the Democratic Party as a national, not just a Southern party, allowing them to eventually start winning elections again. Counter-revolution in the South. Ex-Confederates regained political power in the South. Paramilitary groups seized power from Republican governments using force and violence. Black leaders were shot, hanged, or beaten to death. Republicans went into hiding out of fear. Democrats called this violent process redemption. Nathaniel Bedford Forrest, ex-Confederate general, was a determined white supremacist and founder / Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, which was founded in 1866 to intimidate African Americans, and freedmen. The KKK became identical to the Democratic Party. Other white supremacy groups included the White League, the Red Shirts, and the Knights of the White Camellia. Racist Democrats took power and reversed the process made by the Republican governments. Into this mess, the federal government was forced to respond, as the states were not protecting the rights of the freedmen. The federal government passed the enforcement laws in 1870, which included the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871. President Grant used federal troops to arrest Klan members and tried to restore order and enforce citizens' rights for freedmen in the South. Democrats took control of the House of Representatives in the election and midterm elections of 1874. The federal government refused to send more troops to the South. Redeemers, or racist Democrats, took control of all but 3 states of the former Confederacy. Reconstruction was almost over. The Supreme Court rejects equal rights. Reformers and Republicans thought they could rely on the Supreme Court to enforce guarantees of civil rights. But unfortunately, they were quickly proved to be incorrect. In the slaughter-out cases of 1873, the Supreme Court undercut the power of the 14th Amendment by ruling that the 14th Amendment only applied to federal citizenship and not things that were completely under state citizenship. In the United States versus Cruikshank in 1876, the Supreme Court ruled that protecting voting rights was beyond federal control and was an issue of the states. The civil rights cases of 1883 ruled the Civil Rights Act of 1875 was unconstitutional and paved the way for the sanction of segregation, the legal separation of the races, which would dominate the South until the modern civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s. The political crisis of 1877, also known as the Compromise of 1877, also known as the end of Reconstruction. The political crisis began with the election of 1876. The Republicans nominated Rutherford B. Hayes, a former Union general from Ohio. If it worked with Ulysses S. Grant, maybe it would work again with Hayes. The Democrats nominated the reform-minded Samuel J. Tilden, who favored home rule for the South, the ending of Reconstruction, and pledged to tackle corruption. Disputed election results from the 3 yet-to-be redeemed states, Florida, South Carolina, and Louisiana, hung in the balance. Both parties claimed these votes. Whoever won these 3 states would win the election. It was a close election. This crisis resulted in a compromise, also known as the Compromise of 1877. In this compromise, Republicans sold out Reconstruction in exchange for Hayes winning the election. So Hayes won the election in exchange for agreeing to end Reconstruction and remove all federal soldiers from the South, marking the end of Reconstruction. The lasting legacies of Reconstruction. The South never returned to the antebellum status quo. Slavery and gang labor were over forever. Slavery was replaced with sharecropping. Former slaves, African Americans, now had the rights to read, write, marry, travel, own land and businesses, and to worship as they pleased. And the Civil War amendments were ratified and approved by all the states and would remain in effect and provide the legal framework for future civil rights movement. The 13th Amendment freed the slaves, abolishing slavery in the United States. The 14th Amendment guaranteed birthright citizenship to anyone who was born in the United States, and with this citizenship came due process or equal protection under the laws. And then the 15th Amendment that provided that all adult males could vote regardless of skin color. Although not perfectly enforced, these would become the basis of the future civil rights movements. Failures of Reconstruction. The majority of freed people lived in poverty. They lost their voting rights to literacy tests, where you had to pass a test to prove that you could read or write before you could vote. Poll taxes, which were you had to pay to vote, and intimidation. If literacy tests and poll taxes didn't work, The terrorist groups would intimidate people who tried to vote, which led to widespread disenfranchisement or losing the right to vote. As Confederates also won control of the nation's memory of Reconstruction, spinning the narrative that the Republican governments were run by ignorant, lazy blacks and corrupt northern whites, and didn't accomplish very much. And this is the end of the notes for today. Until next time, 1877 and beyond, the Gilded Age. And then until then, make sure you like, subscribe, add, ring that bell for notifications. Mr. B out.